Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're at in the world today. I'd like to thank you for joining me on today's third lesson as we continue to discuss the different various physical wounds and correlating those physical wounds to the 5 soul wounds. And so before we get into our lesson today, I just want to thank you for joining me. I want to remind you that I have a website, and you can go to my website at lovebeyondpain.com, and that's lovebeyondpain.com. I have a blog there, podcasts, products. My book is there. If you would like to purchase it on Amazon, you can get it from Amazon, or you can purchase it from me directly, and I'll sign it and ship it to you. Also, what's on my website is my product line of goalies that I take every morning for energy and to help me to lose weight, which I'm doing. And so visit me there. I also have a blog where I put forth questions, and we want to get into having some discussions about our souls and about the wounds that we incur in life through and by others, as well as the things that we do to others. And so we've talked about abrasional wounds, we've talked about lacerational wounds, and so today's third lesson is on incisional wounds. So I'll give you a definition on what is an incisional wound, and then we'll get into further discussing about how incisional wounds are made to the soul. All right, so this is the third lesson, and it's on incisional wounds. And so an incisional wound is defined as a long, narrow opening to the skin by a sharp object. The verb to cut means to penetrate. And incisional wounds are often denoted when someone is going through a particular surgical procedure where the doctor has a targeted area that he wants to cut into. It could be your arm, it could be your leg, it could be your neck. I've had an incisional wound here. It could be anywhere on the body, but it's called an incisional wound. But those incisional wounds can be very superficial, or they can be very deep incisions, depending on what needs to be treated in that area by your doctor. And an incisional is a clean, straight cut by a sharp object that tends to bleed heavily. And so we can make incisions to one's soul, and as it is very targeted and very deliberate when it comes down to the doctor making an incisional wound. It's very specific, so sometimes we can make very targeted and very specific wounds to one's soul, meaning that we intentionally meant to do it, we were deliberate at doing it, and we had a targeted standpoint of what we wanted to do to injure someone's soul. An incisional wound to the soul. And so just to recap, to remind you that our soul is comprised of the mind, the will, and our emotions. Our mind is what gathers information and retains information. And our will is our decision-making process, whether we're going to do something or whether we're not going to do something. And our emotions tend to feel love and hate and misery and loathing and joy and laughter and happiness. It could be good or bad in our emotions of what we feel. So remember, the soul is the mind, the will, and our emotions. And so soul wounds is comprised of, now I just told you what our soul is comprised of, but the soul wounds that we inflict on others or others inflict on us are 5. And those 5 soul wounds are betrayal, abandonment, rejection, humiliation, and injustices. And so an incisional wound to the soul are very, like I said, very deliberate and intentional, just as a doctor or a surgeon is about to target a specific area. Sometimes we know the weaknesses of other people, and just to hurt that person or to bring them down or to make them feel bad about something that you might know about them, you will target that area to their soul, and you will continue to cut into their soul, making an incisional wound. All right. And so when a soul wound is activated against someone, that injured person tends to mask certain behaviors that do not correspond to who that person is and what that person would really do under normal circumstances. An injured soul will try and mask the pain that they are feeling, but the problem with that is that the body cannot hide what the mind is thinking. And so our body tends to react to what the mind is thinking. And so we have to be very mindful or very careful about how we treat others and why we're treating that person the way that we're treating them. And so if you are doing an incisional soul wound to someone, you are being very targeted and very deliberate at hurting that person. And rejection is a very deep soul wound. And people who suffer rejection feel they have no right to exist, and it causes the person to hide for fear of not being accepted. Have you ever felt rejected, or have you ever rejected someone, making them feel like they have no value, they have no worth, they have no standing in your life, they have no standing on this earth? And so depending on how deep you want to go in rejecting someone, it can be very devastating and very traumatic to that person that you have targeted and that you have intentionally meant to cause rejection. So that is one of the soul wounds. And the behavior of a rejected soul is a person that seeks to flee away. The person seeks solitude for fear of too much attention, and they become afraid that they may say or do something wrong. And this causes fear and panic to that person who has been rejected. We must be very careful about rejecting people and hurting people through rejection. And so another incisional wound to the soul is abandonment. The person feels emotionally undernourished. This feeling of abandonment makes the person feel they can't do anything alone, and they are in need of constant help and support. And so an incisional wounded person feels this abandonment, has many up and down days. And an abandoned person can also dramatize a lot, and they tend to take sometimes a small incision and create a huge or a big, gigantic episode, when they're going through these feelings of abandonment. And this is a person who has a very damaged soul. And the damage could start with rejection and then end in abandonment. The two can go hand in hand. And the abandoned soul's biggest fear is loneliness. And so the next incisional wound to the soul is humiliation. And a person who feels humiliated feels ashamed of him or herself. They often feel abused. A humiliated soul will sometimes humiliate others. They tend to make others feel they cannot do anything without them. All right, so that's an incisional wound of humiliation. An incisional wound of the soul of betrayal has a difficult time accepting, the cowardliness in others. They can be very controlling. A betrayed person have very strong feelings in what they believe, and they can try to convince you of what they believe. The fears of the betrayed soul is disengagement, separation, disassociation, and denial. So that's the incisional wound of betrayal. The next one is the incisional wound to the soul is injustice. And so a person who is rigid, and an injustice person can be a person who is rigid and inflexible. And to be rigid means to be have the inability to bend. You're unable to change or to adapt. And you can be very stiff and just won't bend one way or the other. You're what we would call set in your ways. And so you're rigid. And these wounded souls are perfectionists. They cut themselves off from feelings and always justify themselves. They find it difficult to admit they have a problem. This soul likes order and tends to control his or her own atmosphere. The incisional wounded soul of injustice can be short-tempered, cold, and has trouble showing affection. And so when we intentionally try to make other people feel bad, when we set out to intentionally wound someone, intentionally cut them, when we know that they have a weakness in a particular area, let's say, for instance, someone who might have a difficult time with alcohol or substance abuse or something of that nature, and we know about it. We may know the person personally, and we know about their ups and downs. We know about what they're going through in life. And so because we may be frustrated or upset with that person about something, and we want to get at that person about the weakness that they have in their life, we have a tendency to make an incisional wound to their soul and just begin to humiliate and belittle them. We will abandon people who are on drugs or alcohol. There's so many different things that we can go about making these incisional wounds to people's souls. And so we have to learn, and we have to be more cognitive of the fact that we all have weaknesses and we all have ignorances. And so if we love a person, we need to try to make good or make right as much as we possibly can. Not everyone that you want to go to them and ask for forgiveness for what you may have done want to receive you back. And so that is the risk that you take in loving someone, is that you want to go to them and you want to say to them how sorry you are about hurting them, but they may want to just wallow in the pain that you have caused them. And so you might be ready to expect that if you make a decision to ask someone to forgive you, they may not be willing to forgive you. And that is just part of human nature. It is on them to decide whether they want to forgive you or not. I would encourage anyone to forgive and to be reconciled and be restored in a situation if they can. But when a person decides that they just want to hold on to those soul wounds, there's really not much that you can do about it. You just have to continue to love that person and let them go, because they are making a willful decision that they want to hold on to what you have said or done to them, and they don't want to forgive you. We can be positive lights in other people's lives if we so choose to be. Love beyond pain is about loving yourself. It's about loving others as you love yourself. It's about running and walking even though you may feel the wounds that someone else has inflicted upon you. It doesn't keep you from moving on in life. Life only ends when you decide not to begin again. And so I encourage you today that if you've been wounded by someone, if you feel injured by someone, or if you have injured someone, the first thing that you would want to do is ask God to forgive you. And then you go and ask that person to forgive you as well. And hopefully, him or her will be willing to reconcile back with you and restore the relationships. Oftentimes, there are relationships that are unrestorable, and that's just something we just have to accept as a fact of life, and we need to continue to move on. Life continues on. Life doesn't stop because we incur or we inflict soul wounds. We continue on with life, and we try to find the joys in life as best as we possibly can. Life is beautiful. Before my brother Victor died, his last words were, "Life is beautiful." And I like to think that life is beautiful because the light of God and God's word exists in me. And so life is beautiful because he lives, I also live, and I can face tomorrow. I can face my sorrows and my pains, my up days and my down days. And so I encourage you today that if you're experiencing social or any type of intimate, whether social, because you can inflict or endure social wounds as well, but any type of intimacy, intimate wounds, I encourage you today, don't die where you are. Don't stay where you are. Because the longer you stay in those emotional soul wounds, the more you're going to find your life going downhill. The more you're going to find these dark clouds that's going to be over your head every day. You're going to wake up every morning and you're going to constantly remember what was said and done to you. And is that the kind of life you want to continue to live? Or do you want to live a fulfilled life? Do you want to live the type of life that's productive, the type of life that is producing life, not only in yourself, but life in others? Because that's what growing is all about. Growing is about being that tree that is producing good fruit in your life, that is producing love and joy and happiness and peace and faith and contentment in your life. This is what the joy of the Lord is about. And we share those fruits with people that we know and sometimes people that we don't know. But we can do it if we make a conscious decision to do so. And so today's third lesson on emotional soul wounds is that we were talking about the incisional wound. And the incisional wounds are very precise, they're very intentional, and they're very deliberate. And if we set out to be very deliberate in causing other people pain, then we might have to ourselves pay a high price for that. And so if you cause these types of pains, just think about if someone comes along and causes an incisional wound to your soul. It doesn't feel good. Rejection, abandonment, humiliation, all of these things do not feel good when they are inflicted on your soul. Our soul retains and our soul remembers things, but we don't have to allow it to define us. We don't have to allow it to rule us for the rest of our lives. We can overcome emotional soul wounds through prayer, through forgiveness, through the love of God. We can get past and we can get over emotional soul wounds. They may not never go away, but with time, they do ease up. And the pain of what happened does ease away. You will always remember what happened to you, but it doesn't have to take over your life. So I thank you for listening today. And I encourage you to love someone, give someone a hug today, give someone an encouraging word today. They may be in need of it because they're going through emotional soul wounds. Again, my name is Tommy Faye Fulton. I am the author of Love Beyond Pain, Walk and Run While Wounded. And I thank you for joining me today. Do have a wonderful and grateful day today. Bye-bye.